when I talk to businesses, I always say, make sure, first of all, if a business owner, I say, make sure your husband or your wife agrees with your business, because if not, it will go under very fast, right? Some of you are smiling and some of you are not smiling. So hopefully it's not out of personal experience. And then the other thing I said, make sure you get a very good CPA, right? Because they have to do your taxes. And if you're late with taxes, that means the government may have to come and find out what's going on. And I also say, make sure you get a good banker, right? Because that's where your money is going. Deposits go there, and sometimes you may need credit and lines of credit. But then the other person I said you need to have is make sure you have a good lawyer. Because we all know about talk reform and how people can sue you for anything these days. So our next presenter will let you know in terms of not only how you need to prepare yourself as an entrepreneur, as a business here in the United States, but what are some of the things that may flare up the moment you start to, or what are the consequences for you having not only a U.S. business, doing business in the international community, because there are laws, American laws you need to abide by if you are a U.S. citizen or if you are a permanent resident when you go and do business outside of the United States. You're not precluded from those laws. And so that's why we are delighted to have our brother Edward Neufville from the Louisville Law. Come on, let's give him a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you all, for having me today. Before I get on as to the legal part, I would like to expound on as to how I got to start my own law firm and the challenges or the hurdles that led up to that and how those lessons from that can be transferred. I will reintroduce myself because this will be the hallmark of what I'll be speaking about. My name is Edward Neufville, and I stutter. And as a lawyer for the last 15 years, I stutter. And I'm a business owner, I'm a father, I'm a husband. I ran track for Liberia at the age of 19. During the Civil War, I helped organize the Liberian track team to represent in in Atlanta, and as well, when I graduated from law school in 2003, I started my law firm in 2004. But a part of all those things, one thing that has always been kind of what have driven or shaped my life or the trajectory of my life is the fact of my speech. And numerous of times, as you all may understand, you're in class and the teacher goes around the room and you have to read, or you go to an event and you have to go around the table. And I always couldn't understand why you have to have a name tag, but yet you have to go around the room again, to introduce yourself. And many times before, I will shy away from events and I will shy away from things because if I didn't have to speak or if I didn't have to talk, I wouldn't talk. Now, you may say, well, why should you become a lawyer if all you do is, you have to speak and you have to basically make a living talking for people? And that's the fear and that's the challenge that I had to face and I have to come to terms with. And entrepreneurs, even those who are just starting, everybody has their own fears. People have their own challenges, but you have to face those fears. Now, it's not all about conquering fears because in my opinion, if you conquer something, that's good, but it always tends to rear its head back somewhere. If you face your fears, those fears lessen, and you tend to use it to project and enhance what you have to offer. When I came to the U.S., I was 14 years old. I ran track at UNC. And at the time in 1996, when I started to run track, the individuals that I trained with would go on to win world championships. And when you look at the roster of my teammates, every one of them now in the last 10, 20 years have either set a world record, won championships, and gone on successfully. In practice, it was very intense, and you had to deal with those fears or your own fears as a hurdler. And I use the example of the hurdle race because you're at the starting line and you're trying to get to the finish line. And in between the starting line and the end line, there are these hurdles. And the hurdles are about 3 inches or so high. But the more you practice those hurdles and the more you run those races, those hurdles begin to get smaller and smaller. And they become less of an obstacle, but they in turn become more of you trying to fine-tune your technique, and they almost become your friend. I know for myself, when I ran track and when I was in those races, I used to look forward to attacking those hurdles and going across those hurdles and seeing how much seconds I can shave off each hurdle that I run over. Now, how do you face your fears and how do you approach that? It's not always easy, and it's still not always easy now. For the moment I wake up, for the moment I have to appear before a judge, you have to say your name. And you would think by now I would have gotten it to the point where there would be no fear. But every time I go in front of the same judge, same scenario, and I get stuck on my name. Now, if you know individuals who have this problem, it's like the things that you have to say is the things that you get the hardest problem with. I can recite a poem without no problem, but if I have to say my name or if I have to pick up the phone, that could be very frightening. So what did I have to do is I had to face my fears. And I had to say that it was not enough that I was smart. It was not enough that I knew the law. It was most important is how I'm able to communicate and advocate for my client. It is not so much as to how I say it, but the content and the substance of what you say. And so I faced my fears by doing the very thing that I feared the most, was speaking. And even today, when Samuel came up to me and said, "Can you speak?" I thought, do I really want to speak? Do I really have to speak? So I said, yes, why not? Because a year ago, I told my wife and I said, you know what, I've been practicing for 15 years in the U.S., but part of me still wanted to find a way how to bridge the gap to go back to the continent. And not necessarily to West Africa, but to the continent as a whole, because I believe that we are from West Africa, East Africa, but our countries we are bigger than where we are from. And the continent can definitely benefit what we have to provide. And so the first thing is, if I'm going to be able to communicate and go to different countries and be able to speak, I have to face those fears. I have to face that fear, and I have to be able to be comfortable with my shortcomings and to be able to use my shortcomings to my advantage. And that's what I've decided to do over the years. Now, you heard about my time in the Olympics. You heard my time about coming and transitioning as a child from Liberia to the U.S. And those were also challenging times. Those were times where I was forced to grow up and forced to realize what choices I had to make. Part of my practice is that I help folks regularize their status. I do green cards, I do deportation, defense, naturalization. I didn't come out with the intention of doing those, but I definitely had a lot of experience. In 1999, I had to forego traveling to Spain because I didn't have the right travel document at that time to leave. In 2000, at the Sydney, I had to decide, well, whether to go to law school or to run, and if I decided to run, what will happen to my visa status here, and how I'll be able to bridge that gap. And so those were the decisions that I had to make that at that time it felt as a setback, but it also provided the fuel that I needed when I started my practice. Now, as an entrepreneur, how do you face your fears? How do you move forward? And using the athletics analogy is you have to get up. And get up is the first step, is that you have to be ready to move and take action. And like an athlete that gets up and prepares and takes it upon himself to face those hurdles, we as entrepreneurs have to be able to realize what are the hurdles and what are the obstacles. In our own experience, as we try to bridge to go back to the continent, is dealing with what the continent has to offer and what we at times say, well, things on the ground are not what we want it to be. Well, it's not going to be what you want it to be. You have to create it the way how you want it to be. Once you get up, you have to lace up, you have to put your shoes on, and you have to train. And you have to train to the point where your body and your mind starts to repeat those actions out of habit. What happens when a runner runs is that once the adrenaline kicks in, the mind and the body reverts to what you know, and that's habit. You have in your mind, this is what I'm going to do, here's what the things I'm going to do once I get in the blocks. Once the gun goes off, you revert to what you have been trained and what your body knows, and that's why athletes practice over and over so the mind gets used to it. And what do I do as a stutterer is that every single chance I get is that I talk. I tell my wife, if there's 5 things you need to do today, tell me, I will call around and I will talk. And I will conquer that fear or lessen that fear because I have a vision and I know where I want to go. Now, after you lace up, it's on your marks and you're in the starting blocks and you're going forward. And you're in the race. At a certain point, you will get tired and there will be hurdles and there will be setbacks. But seldom do professional athletes look back and say, I just hit 3 hurdles. The guy next to me is running faster. I've never seen it happen before. You're focused and you're moving and you're going after each hurdle. And it's okay to knock those hurdles down. There's nothing that says that you can't. But you keep moving forward and you keep going forward. And you cross the finish line. And the first thing that most athletes do when they cross the finish line is not to look back as to how many hurdles they've looked, to look at the score to see how fast did I run and how well did I do. And so in shifting this to entrepreneurs is that, of course, you have to have your goal and you have to have your vision, and there will be hurdles. And in fact, hurdles are supposed to be there, and they're supposed to fine-tune you, and they're supposed to get you ready for the race and get you ready for the final race. And the more you do it over and the more you do it over and over again, those obstacles and those fears lessen to the point where they become part of your general, strategy. You expect them to happen, you want them to happen, and you're looking forward for it to happen so that you can show your worth and you can show what you are and who you are. Now, for the last 15 years, I have run my own my own law practice in Silver Spring, and basically, I help as I sell myself is that I'm a problem solver, and I handle complex problems. The way I see myself is that before someone is either deported or before a case is denied, I'm the last stop. And my approach to my cases, my visas cases, all stem from my experience, all stems to my desire to overcome what I see as hurdles. And as I tell all my clients is that there's always a solution. There's never no solution. It may not be the solution that you want, but there's a solution. It may come maybe 2 or 3 years after, or not immediately, but there's a solution. Most of my clients now have obtained their citizenship or their legal status, and they have started to look at ways to go back to the continent. And the first thing that they come to me is, what are the risks if I'm a citizen? What is the risk if I'm a green card holder, and what can I do? Now, I'm not an expert on everything, tax law and all those things, but what I serve and what I provide them is more of a common sense advisory on what they need to do. 3 minutes? Okay, so I have 1 minute. I hope that I was able to get across my main point about facing your fears, but it's been a pleasure having to talk with you all, and I hope that this event continues to prosper, and that in the coming years that the seats are full, but I thank you all for coming.